Hi, and welcome to this installment of Frank and Mary here in Hudson. If you haven't seen this show before, my name is Art Bergeron. My day job, I work at Myrick O'Connell. I do nothing but elder law, but this is not about elder law. This is about Frank and Mary and their goal, which is to live in their house until they die and be buried in the backyard. If you've seen my presentations at the Hudson Senior Center, you've seen these folks before. So the question is, what are the things you know that you need to know about as a Hudson senior to help you live happily ever after right where you are? So we have two great guests with us today. My co-host John Parent couldn't be with us today. We have two wonderful guests, Andy Horwitz and Tom Desmond. They're both founders of the Hudson Cultural Alliance. And we asked these folks to come on today to talk about probably one of the most significant things that is going to be discussed, and maybe the one of the most expensive. It's a big item at the next town meeting, which is going to be on November the 16th. And that is the warrant article related to the Hudson Armory. And I will let Tom and Andy elaborate on what the article is about and why they are very much supportive of this. So who wants to start?
I'm happy to dive in. Thank you, Arthur, for the introduction and the opportunity to tell you and your audience about the work we're doing here. The first
thank
important
you, and thank you both for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So the first important point I think we'd like to make clear to everyone is that there is no money involved in the November warrant article. On the 16th, the town has an opportunity to continue the process moving forward for our nonprofit to fund the acquisition of the Armory by the town. So in November, when we get together, presumably at the high school, I guess we'll see, we're going to have an up-down vote as to whether the town should pursue the process. And there's no commitment of dollars whatsoever from the town to that process. And so what does all of this mean? Well, if I may, I'd love to tell just a brief story about maybe how we got to this point. So, the state of Massachusetts, the Division of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance, DCAM, has been going through a multi-decade process at this point of disposing of older state assets, the Hudson Armory now among them. And so it was a couple of years back where DCAM approached the town of Hudson and said, would you like to buy the Armory before we take it to the public market? And at that time, a group of downtown businesses, the Business Improvement District, explored that opportunity, and they explored a range of angles, for use of this building. And they thought that a performing arts center was potentially a good use of the facility. And they developed a plan around building out a 400-seat modern theater at a cost of up to $10 million. There's no path from 0 to $10 million. So the bid pulled back, and Mr. Desmond and I, along with some others, stepped into the void to pursue the acquisition of the Armory and to get hold of the building on behalf of the town. And so we, as the Hudson Cultural Alliance, have been engaged with the town and state for about a year now. About 3-4 weeks ago, we learned that our purchase price for the Armory would be $230,000 for use as an arts and culture facility. And so now we are actively fundraising to pay for our private organization to fund the acquisition of the Armory by the town.
I see. So that's, I think that's really informative. And I think, once again, one of the reasons for this show is to give people kind of a sense before they're walking into a town meeting of what's really going on. Because one of the things it's difficult now with kind of the lack of a kind of a substantial local newspaper to have those kinds of conversations. So you're saying that the warrant article, so technically, does the warrant article commit the town to purchase the building, or does it simply basically put a hold on that until some some later date.
Tom, you want to take this one?
Yeah, what this does is it really just essentially it says that the town wants to continue the process. And if it passes, what will then happen is DCAM, the state agency, will draft up legislation because under the bidding laws, the state laws, the legislature actually has to give DCAM the authority to sell the property to the town. So all this really does is it says, yes, the town is still interested. DCAM will develop the legislation, and then we've already met with our local legislators, Kate Hogan and Jamie Eldridge. It will then be up to them to shepherd that legislation through the state legislature. Once that process starts, that's really when the clock starts ticking for us. We've been told that once that legislation is introduced, we have roughly 6 months in order to come up with the purchase price money, the $230,000. So what this is really saying is the town is saying to the state, we want to continue the process.
I see. I see. And where did the $230,000 figure come from?
That the Hudson Cultural Alliance, we paid for a private company to come in and do an assessment on the property. And that, as Andy, I think, alluded to, we just recently got that final report that outlined how they went through the process and how they came up with that number. But that was done as a result of a professional company coming in and assessing the property.
I see. And do you have some indication that the Commonwealth will agree to the sale of that property for that amount?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yes. The entire process was contingent on them doing the assessment and coming up with the price. Yes, that's. I see. As far as we know, that's a fixed price.
I see. And I would suppose that in terms of your fundraising efforts, it would be really difficult to do much fundraising unless you already had that kind of commitment from the town that said that if the money was raised, that the building would be transferred. So kind of as a related question, since you're telling me that this was part of a state process that basically gave the town the option to buy the building before it went out on the market. So in this process, is it anticipated that therefore the town would end up acquiring the building, that you folks would fund the acquisition, but that the town would acquire the building?
That's exactly right. And so the process is the opportunity for the town is for the town or its designee to operate the building. And so under our model, the profit funds the acquisition by the town, and then we strike an operating agreement with the town.
And so if I'm a town, if I'm a senior, right? And so I'm hearing this and I'm saying, well, this is great. I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate. So this is great because we're not paying for the purchase, but now we own this building, and it's a big building that's been there for a while. And once again, I have never been in that Armory, right? I don't think, and I'm an old guy, right? But I can't remember. It seems to me that there was a Marlboro City Council inauguration that ironically happened in that Armory, because the Marlboro Armory was having. So anyway, that was a long time ago. But if I'm that town taxpayer, I'm saying to myself, so what am I buying here? Who's going to pay the maintenance on the building, and who's going to insure it, and who's going to do all that other stuff? And then kind of what's the plan? So can you kind of speak to those issues? How do you imagine that building functioning in an ongoing way? I'm presumably without town support, right? but with the nonprofit having the capacity to basically make sure that all the bills get paid. You just kind of speak to that.
Sure. And the thrust of this initiative and our ask of the town meeting voters and previously of the Board of Selectmen is to simply give our nonprofit the opportunity to continue to pursue this project. Because as long as there are no administrative roadblocks, our organization can continue to fundraise, then acquire the building, and then we're approaching this eyes wide open. We recognize that the building needs at least $1 million worth of repairs to get it open to the public. But step one for us is to get hold of the building, strike an operating agreement with the town of Hudson, continue to fundraise. Yes, our organization will be responsible for the maintenance and upkeep, insurance of that building under that operating agreement. And if we can't hold up our end, the town can go ahead and move on from the building. There's really no risk to the town. And so we acquire the building, we continue fundraising toward its rehabilitation with an end goal of creating a community arts center, an open space that can be home for artists, music and theater performance acts, winter farmers market. The opportunity for the town is to have us as a private organization raise and invest hundreds of thousands and potentially millions of dollars in the coming years in this downtown community asset, and to keep it under town control at, our goals at no cost to the taxpayer.
So once again, if I'm a Hudson, so if I'm a senior and I've got nothing to do, which most of us don't have anything to do these days, right? And I wanted to drive around, are there any other models in communities like here in Massachusetts, ideally close by, but just communities in Massachusetts where this is the path that they took, and that there's some ongoing stuff that is, and how would I find those? Because I would think that'd be my goal. I'd be hearing this and saying, well, this all sounds great, but I'd like to see if it worked someplace, before we did anything.
Well, the model that we looked at was actually is not nearby. It's the Somerville Armory. The town of Somerville renovated an armory. The design is not quite exactly the same, but the layout is similar, and now that eventually was a private entity, took that over. They have a performing arts center there. They have a coffee shop. They've also renovated a number of the office areas for small businesses. So that's, in terms of an armory, that's probably the best example locally. Is it Natick or Framingham, Andy, where
Natick.
Natick took an old fire station and did something similar. It's TCAM or TCAN?
TCAN,
the Center for the Arts.
Yes. So
an unbelievable facility, facility, right? Took them a while, but it's really grown over time. Very substantial.
And so early on in this process, probably we're talking maybe 18 months to almost 2 years ago, when I was working on this project with the Business Improvement District, we went over on a couple of occasions and toured the Somerville facility. And that's kind of been the model we've been working with as we move forward here. This has always been, in our minds, a long-term plan. But we realized last year, we applied for a number of grants from the state and the federal government, but we found, unfortunately, because we didn't actually own the property, that they were hesitant to approve any of that funding. We're pretty confident that if and when we can own this property, we will then be eligible for a number of both state and federal funding to help us forward with this project.
And so does that, and so from that, are you anticipating that, and I'm going back to something that Andy had kind of mentioned earlier, that I think he indicated that there would be an option under this process for the building to be conveyed to the town or its designee. Are you anticipating that the final deal would be that the Commonwealth would convey the building directly to the Hudson Arts Alliance or to an entity created by the Hudson Arts Alliance, as opposed to transferring it to the town?
Our understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, is that it would have to go to the town initially. And then we would work out a deal with the town. So for example, when DCAM requested that the town pay for an assessment of the building, the Hudson Cultural Alliance gave the money to the town, and then the town paid DCAM to have the assessment done. So we see some kind of an arrangement there, but I believe under the legislation, it has to be conveyed initially to the town of Hudson.
And do you know, once it has been conveyed to the town of Hudson, whether there are any constraints on the town's ability to then convey it to you? Once again, I'm thinking of it from as an old senior taxpayer it was looking at this building going, oh my God, if there's a problem, then, there's a slip and fall, there's liability. And if the Hudson Cultural Alliance fails, what are we stuck with, right? So does the town have the ability to just turn around and convey the property to you folks at that point, so that you can kind of do these other things?
Yeah, there are some restrictions. And so the price, for example, the $230,000 price is predicated on the building being used as an arts and culture center. For other different and other than nonprofit uses of the building, I believe the purchase price is on the order of $1 million. So the price of the building is informed by its end use, and so there are some restrictions in that vein.
I see. And so if it is the town, and that means the crucial piece of this is that you need to be having this operating agreement with the town to kind of do this stuff. Do you have any kind of budget sense of how that would look over I would assume you've got some initial period where you're going to have to be raising money to do whatever renovations you have to do. I would assume the magic ADA words always, ring out when I see a large building like this. I would think you've got an elevator issue, you got those kinds of issues. So you've got this period where you're basically just spending, and then at that point, then you've got this operational period once you're steady. So can you give people a sense of how that might play out, or are you figuring that you're going to have that information to folks, kind of in short order, like before the actual acquisition occurs?
And so you're right. So there are, in our rehabilitation model, there are inclusions for accessibility, elevators, asbestos remediation. We know that there are issues with the building, hence the high cost of rehabilitation. We think it's worth it. You're right. There is going to be a period from acquisition through fundraising and rehabilitation where we will need to maintain the building, ostensibly without operating revenue.
Right.
It's our understanding that the state's cost of holding the building in recent years has been on the order of $40,000 to $50,000 per year. But based on conversations with a range of local people, we believe we have tremendous community support for mothballing that building and being able to just hold on to the building and maintain its condition for very low dollars. We'll need to pay somebody to cut the grass, but there's not likely to be a whole lot that needs to be done on an ongoing basis on the interior if we can turn off the plumbing and shut the building down for even if it's a couple of years while we fundraise. We expect those maintenance costs during that time to be effectively de minimis.
And at this point, do you have you had mentioned the figure $1 million in terms of the cost of actually doing what you wanted to be doing. So does there exist kind of a scope of what that would look like in terms of the elevator and the yada, 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 that adds up to a figure? And is that figure, can you talk about what that figure is at this point? Obviously, that's always a moving target because, it depends on when you're doing it.
It is, of course, and we've had an architect involved from the beginning, and we have estimates from we had architect and we had construction professional involved with this project from the beginning. We have estimates from Caisson Construction alluding to a phased approach. It's a big building, effectively 2 floors plus the balcony, more than 30,000 square feet. We think based on those projections, it's about $1 million to get the first floor open and operating, and a little bit closer to $2 million to rehabilitate the entire building. There are some efficiencies gained if we could do the whole building at once, but we think that we can be successful and get the building open to the community once we acquire the building and raise the $1 million to at least rehabilitate the first floor. And then we could take further rehabilitation and our longer term goal of a community theater in phases.
I see. And so, so assuming that you were doing it in phases, can you just kind of or do you have a plan? I should have asked if there was just a physical plan that people could see. I should have asked if you wanted to do a kind of a screen share with a plan of something of kind of how that would lay out so that people could get a sense of, for that kind of money, we're not doing these other things, but we have this we have a performance space. Because once again, I've never been in the building, so I don't know what the rehabilitation of the first floor looks like.
And I would
essentially, if you look at the building from the front, that's there's all office and classroom space there. The entire back piece of the building, the first floor, is, for lack of a better word, a huge gymnasium. It was used as recently as last year by the state fire services. They had set up an obstacle course in there for training their firemen. Our feeling is that, and based on the discussions we had with the architect and with Caisson Construction, that we could rehabilitate that first floor, that gymnasium, which would give you a ton of open space to do flea markets, farmers markets. The library could run their book sale there, and so on. And we actually have a 3D model that, in the early stages of this, we were hauling around with us to various venues to show people. And we also have the architect that was working with us has drafted up some mock-ups of what it would look like. And of course, it's what it would look like in the final stage, not maybe midway. But we've got a pretty good idea of how it would all lay out. The classroom spaces that are there now, those could be used for classrooms. They could be used for small business. The basement of the building is really, there's not a lot of permanent walls in there, so that could be designed or built almost to spec for a particular, if a dance company wanted to come in, if Symphony Pro Musica wanted to put in some practice rooms. So in our discussions over the past year and a half with River's Edge Arts Alliance, Symphony Pro Musica, the Hudson Public Library, we've got a number of ideas or suggestions from them as to what some of that layout would look like. The gymnasium area where the theater eventually would be designed with movable seating, so that during the time of year that you weren't using it for the theater, you could use it for a farmer's market or a book sale or a Comic-Con, whatever. It would give us it's going to be designed with a lot of flexibility.
And so going to that, so does that, I'm thinking about that $1 million. So two kind of, I want to say, final questions, because I'm just kind of trying to be attentive to my time too.
Sure.
Like in terms of what the $1 million would buy you, assuming you were raising $1 million. So at the end of that day, you would have the front rooms, you'd have this big back space. Is that space at that point a performance space, or does the performance, the stage and that stuff's still have to be built out?
That's probably further down the road. What that first million, I think it was roughly $1 million to $1.5 million, depending on what route we went. That would bring the building up to code. It would make it handicapped accessible, meet the ADA requirements, and would allow us to let the public into the building. The public would be able to use the building.
I got it. And do you have a sense at that point, while you were trying to fundraise for other things, of what your run rate would be to operate the building just in that way, to have it open to the public to be doing these kinds of activities, just so that people have a sense, once again, of without it being a performance space, but with that money in there, about what they're figuring that you would need in order to run that.
Yeah, and I think that's where we come in, right? Because these community centers only work if the building is capitalized, because none of these businesses can afford a mortgage on the facility. So we capitalize the building, and our operating costs for the facility could be on the order of $100,000 a year.
Just to give folks a sense. Well, listen, thank you very much. I think that I hope this has been helpful. It's certainly been helpful for me. I hope it's been helpful to a lot of the Frank and Marys out there who are kind of, looking at this, hoping very much that the Armory is preserved and that there's a real positive result to that building. It's certainly an anchor, positive or negative, to what has turned into a wonderful downtown. Good luck at town meeting. I know that we've got somebody coming on in the next show to talk about talk the other side, so that people can kind of see what the alternatives are. And best of luck. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And folks, thank you very much for watching. And we really appreciate your interest in the show, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next installment of Frank and Mary here in Hudson. Thank you.
Thank you.